Hey.
In terms that us brain injury survivors can understand, I'm Paige Speers of Choose Greater Health, and this is Victoria Day, and you can say your title.
Okay. So I am a registered somatic therapist and educator, and I'm also a certified movement analyst, which is a master's level certification in something called Laban movement analysis. And I've also am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Missouri.
So in terms that us brain injury survivors can understand, what does your initial evaluation look like?
Oh, okay. So you want me to talk a little bit more about, let's see. So, when someone comes to work with me as Embodiment LLC, which is what I call the part of my work where we really focus on the body as the vessel of change, right? Rather than when someone comes into me as a licensed professional counselor, I'm still bringing all these skills in, but most people think of licensed professional counselors as someone you go and you sit and you talk about things, right? And so even though that is not true with me, when someone comes in that world, that's where we start. For someone who wants to come to me about repatterning work, which is what is a nice way for me to explain what I do as Embodiment LLC. From the beginning, as they're, as they walk in, as we're talking, as we're walking into the space, as they're sharing with me about what their concerns are, what it is that brought them into that session, I'm just allowing myself to observe how the person is using their body parts, right? What seems integrated, what seems like it's not part of the whole movement. I'm also noticing how they move in space, how they use their words. Are they talking really fast? Are they talking very slowly? And the thing about the observation is, at that point, I'm not making any real assessment. I'm just collecting information. I'm noticing where there's strengths, where there's challenges. I'm noticing what capacities that person is already doing quite easily and may not even realize that they're doing them. And then also listening to them tell me because usually people don't come in to either of my professions and say, here's all my strengths, right? Most people come in and they say, here's the thing I can't do, or here's the thing that's causing me a challenge, or here's the thing that I feel like I'm not successful at, right? And so I'm looking in my very first assessment, when someone comes in, I'm looking for all the ways they're already bringing in a lot of skills, right? And then I'm also hearing the parts that feel like they're not as skilled as they'd like to be. And I'm also noticing the places that I'm noticing where there's something that seems out of balance. So did that seem like an answer that someone with brain injury could understand?
Yeah, and that moves into my question then of what factors inform your treatment approach and how does this go beyond traditional PT or complement it?
Right. So what I've discovered in my work, and this is actually so yeah, what I've discovered is that for a lot of people, physical therapy is um, is disconnected and has no context, and that the physical therapist is saying, move a part of your body in a certain way, a certain number of reps, so many times a day. And and it's there's a very small percentage of us that can maintain that sort of activity for the amount of time that PT takes, just simply because we've willed ourselves to do, right? It's like to say, I'm going to show up, 4 times a day and do these repetitions 20 times. You might be successful the first few days, but most humans, if they have no context, um, they're just, they're actions, right? And so an example is, I mean, if I say to somebody, raise your arm, lower it, raise your arm, lower it, right? A person can do it or not, right? I
Just
mean,
how
so,
much can they raise or lower the arm?
right, right. And that's, so the piece what my work brings in is, the PT is giving the client something valuable from their perspective. Most PTs, although this is not true with all PTs, I've worked with Rachel Wittenberger, who's an integrative PT here in Columbia, Missouri. And Rachel, similar to what I'm describing, the way I understand she works is, I mean, she's watching you as you walk in. She's looking at the way your whole body is working. She's checking in where you're breathing. And then the exercise she's giving you, although it may be focused on a part, she's looking at the way when you move, how that part moving is being affected by and affecting the whole body.
So that's a PT who knows the integrative approach.
Yeah, right. So what I find that for somebody who comes in and they've been working with the PT, what my work can bring in is giving it context, because of my training in the Laban movement analysis, I look at people's movement from a developmental perspective. And that basically, I mean, the easiest way to explain that is that from the time we were conceived until we were, about 2 years old, we were going through these developmental milestones of movement that built on top of each other. There's a parallel, I'll do it this way since I'm looking at the camera, right? So if like this is that pattern of how you're moving, your brain is also developing. And the truth is, your brain develops because of how you move, which allows your brain to develop, which allows you to move with more complexity, right? So that's going on for that first, from, like I said, from birth or from conception, really, because you're already moving and starting to understand your body as a moving thing, even within the womb. So those patterns that were established in your early years don't go away. They're with us throughout our lives. And so what happens for somebody with a brain injury, I mean, it can happen. So let me clarify. So every human being has a situation where we lose connection with these patterns, right? And then we regain them, or we don't. But for someone with a brain injury, there's an even more a higher chance that that part of the brain that's been damaged is also is affecting how that person can move, and which of those patterns have been temporarily or compromised. And so, as we've talked about, so someone can learn the action of staying vertical and the action of reproducing something that appears to be a walk. And yet there may be something that, like, when you observe it or when you yourself are doing it, like, there's a piece missing. Something's not quite as easy or as integrated as before the brain injury, right? And where my work comes in is actually helping the person not only explore those developmental patterns, but also explore, the way their thoughts are challenging them or getting in the way of them being able to slow down enough to explore the patterns, the earlier patterns. How the judgments in the head can then keep us in a pattern of movement that maybe after the brain injury doesn't work anymore, right? So that's where that my work really can be supportive of somebody in PT, because the PT is giving them the action, and they're giving them the movement of the bone and the muscle, and they're saying, move that arm upward. And then we're looking at the developmental patterns that support it. We're looking at the thoughts, the way you think, how that supports it. We're looking at the breath, how that supports it. We're looking at the person's not just looking, we're exploring in movement, the relationship with the person's, whether their muscles are actually trusting that earth is going to support them. And then that's a very different thing of how to notice, is raising my arm, where does it become challenging, right? Yeah. So do I feel like I hit all the points there?
Yeah, and that also relates to what are there common physical issues that you can see your work helping?
Right. So I think that one of the challenges of the work that I offer is that it's valuable for every single human. Because it's an opportunity, because a basic premise is in my work is that movement is about change, and life is about change, and how we as humans negotiate change is by creating patterns. And if we keep doing a pattern without noticing the way that pattern is actually no longer serving us as well, we may be able to do that for a while. And yet at some point, that pattern is going to either cause a depletion in the body, a depletion in our energy. We're going to start running into challenges. And our culture tends to be designed to believe like that those challenges are wrong, and we either need to medicate them or be ashamed of them. And in my work, we're like, no. When we meet a challenge, that's information that there's a pattern that needs to be revisited, revitalized, changed a little bit. However, if you don't have the capacity to go back and know all the skills that you're working with, all the capabilities that you're already working with, then it can feel really hard to change that pattern because you don't know what you want to keep. Right? And that goes back to what I was saying about the assessment of when someone comes in, I'm already like I'm wanting to become aware of what are their strengths and what are they capable of, because that's always the place that we're going to return back to, because that's the neutral. I mean, none of us are have zero capabilities. We're all working with this set that's often unaware. We're unaware of them. It's unspoken, and so regardless, I mean, if someone has a physical condition that they are feeling uncomfortable about and it feels out of balance, there is something there to look at, to explore, to repattern. It's why it also works in mental health work, because if someone has notices a disruption or a dysregulation in the way they're thinking, or the way that they're feeling, it's usually also related to the way they're moving, the way they're responding, right? So again, it's a pattern, and finding out what part of those patterns we want to keep and which parts we want to change is a good way to describe the work that I do.
And how can someone interested in experiencing your work connect with you or another practitioner?
Mm-hmm. So I have my own website. It's called Embodiment LLC. And it's just embodimentllc.com. I'm also part of a healing, wellness, and expressive arts collective in Columbia, Missouri called Kindred Collective. So another way to connect with me in either of my business faces is through Kindred Collective. I have a bio there. A person who was interested in somatic movement therapy or education. And the difference between therapy and education is basically therapy is a one-on-one situation, where education is a group situation. That's the difference based on ISMETA's criteria. But you could also look on the ISMETA website. It's ismeta.org, I believe. Because it's the International Somatic Movement Educators and Therapists Association. That's what ISMETA stands for. You can go on the map and see anywhere in the world where there is a registered somatic movement educator and or therapist. But the piece is you would need to go in, because having that certification, still underneath it, there's a lot of different, there's people who are Feldenkrais instructors. There's people who do somatic experiencing, which is Peter Levine's work dealing with trauma. There's folks like myself who have the Laban certification. There's a lot of different ways that people can be a registered somatic therapist or educator. So
yeah, and the last question, what did you see the need for in your community that prompted you to go into this type of work?
I thought that was such an interesting question. Yeah, I really, that question really prompted me to have to think for a little bit. So, in some ways, getting into this work was very self-focused, because I discovered that movement was healing for me. That I could shift my mood states, and I could shift my physical state by dancing, by moving, by rolling around on the floor, by wiggling, whatever. And then I reached a point where I started hurting myself because the ways I was trying to move to do these things I was actually starting to cause damage. I dislocated a shoulder. I dislocated my pelvis. I had a traumatic brain injury. I broke my leg. I went through a period of really being like, okay, you know, I need movement to be able to feel better, but every time I move, I'm hurting myself. And so that's what took me on the path of doing the Laban movement analysis, because I didn't just want to know a specific thing, like a specific modality. I really wanted to know, how does movement heal, and how can you use movement to heal even within your physical limitations, right? Um, so that's my story. But what I started noticing as I was doing my training is just the number of people around me who were repeating patterns of movement, thought, interaction that was not healing to themselves, not really supportive to themselves. And this is where the idea, the tagline for my work is live life more fully. And because I noticed that there was so much capacity for people to really to be more harmonious, to live more integrated. And so that's what I see in the community. And uh, I think it's also like that, because of my own work, I've come to realize that most humans, most adults, I shouldn't say most humans, because I think this might be more of a Western culture thing, but this idea that, something is wrong, and if it's not fixed quickly, then like that's a crisis. And by shifting, I mean, I had that was my own, philosophy. That's what I grew up with. But having the realization that getting this piece, that it was like something, like things were happening and happening and happening that resulted in this crisis, and that to change it is going to involve something, right? And I think that's one of the challenges that I see, that I saw for myself. No, I'm going to go back. That was one of the challenges, and also one of the things that I learned from my brain injury. A brain injury is not like a chronic illness. Like, I have an autoimmune condition I've dealt with. I had a pregnancy that was very near death. But in both those cases, it was, right? A brain injury is like, boom. And so this is very dramatic change, right? But the thing is that the injury, the brain that gets injured, is in a body and a human and a set of patterns that we're already dealing with, these other little things that are picking, that are these patterns that maybe aren't as supportive, but we just aren't noticing. And the brain injury is like, you cannot not see it. Like for me, my pattern of being type A and being on everything and controlling everything and fast and right? Like when I had my brain injury, when I would try to do that, I would throw up. I would get vertigo, right? And so I had to learn to slow down. Unfortunately, what happened, and I think what happens to a lot of people with brain injury, is because the old pattern was the way we defined success and accomplishment, right? And it gave us a feeling of satisfaction. Now that we're trying to do this new pattern that ultimately might be more healing and helpful and supportive, feels wrong, right? And so I like that's a long way to say what I feel like I see in my community still, right? And I saw at some point, because I saw it in myself, was that uh, our our standard thoughts around uh, healing and around illness and around disease and around trauma um, are 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 not uh, designed to really support us in our healing process. And that's the piece, that whether you already feel like you are fully 100% at capacity, or whether you feel like you're at 0% capacity, that you have the ability to live life more fully. There is always space for change and for learning, right? For learning about a pattern, and for making the choices and repatterning neuromuscularly, right? And in your life. So
That's a great note to end on. Thank you,
I thought
Vic.
so. Yeah.